I'll check the email.
Okay. All right. Okay. A couple administrative things. Obviously, you probably remember that the essay is due, the thesis is due on Tuesday by midnight. That Toby and I will both be staying up, like on New Year's Eve, counting down, and just not that we're going to immediately terminate you or anything at that point. Just that we have such high levels of expectation for these papers coming in that we want to start reading them as soon as we can get our hands on them. Okay?
You're gonna count down. Are you gonna get to have a party like a New Year's party? You should have a party.
Well, it depends on the quality of the papers. That our response will be completely correlative to the quality of the papers. So I do expect a party. Yes, I do. Okay. Now, one other administrative thing, just to show you that long and hard and arduous work pays off. Here's the Canadian government. Bless you. It's still going. The Canadian government has just issued a major set of findings as a result of their commission that they put together to study the taking of Indian children by the Department of Social Services in Canada. This is the same thing that we're working on, we've been working on out in South Dakota for all this time. And that this is just the executive summary. Actually, this is the interim report, but that there's like a 350-page massive document just condemning the crap out of the Canadian government for what they've done to Indian kids. And they're setting up a whole set of recommendations, etc. This is one of those things of confronting a given social public policy problem and coming to grips with it and laying out a strategic way of approaching the solution, etc. Hopefully you're going to be hearing a lot more about this because it just happened. We got it sort of hot off the press because of our work on the area, but you should be starting to hear more and more information about what's going to be happening up there, because it's going to translate into the giving back to the Native American tribes up there substantial portions of land in Canada. And that's where we're going to be going on the project in South Dakota for the return of the Black Hills and a lot of the territory that's in the treaty territory of 1868. Anyway, so that's just a little administrative thing. Now, what I want to do today, we had gotten to the point. It turns out step 3 of what is what I'm referring to is the 12-step program. The 12-step program to setting forth your thesis regarding any major crisis, a secular crisis that you think may be coming up in your lifetimes. So that what I want to do is go through the 12-step program first, laying it out for you so that you can kind of have that as a potential template for thinking about your paper for those of you who haven't completed them yet. This is just how I have done it. If I were sort of given the assignment, and you'll see when we get to step 3 that's the spot where we sort of got into it last Tuesday, which was great, I thought. Okay, the first step in the 12-step program is the first thing that you have to do is you have to very specifically identify what the strategic crisis is that you believe is going to be occurring in your lifetimes. Now, there's a particular time period that's talked about in Generations, History of America's Future, the book I referred to in the very first class that we had. It's a book written by William Strauss and Neil Howe. They're major sociologists from Harvard and Yale, respectively. They wrote the major study when they were both working at Notre Dame University, and it's a major analysis of how it is that these major crises occur in the United States, at least from the point of view of their study, in that they occur within every kind of 100-year period. The 100 years for the beginning and ending of the cycle don't occur right on the 1900 and 2000 and 1800, etc., but they're approximately every 89 to 100 years. and that it's that kind of analysis that suggests that there is, in fact, a major crisis in the offing. Now, fortunately, we have a lot of evidence around about what the nature of that is in this particular instance, whereas the huge economic crash that took place in 1929 and began the immediate previous cycle was pretty sudden, and it fell upon the world actually rather suddenly in the fall of 1929. This is a crisis that has been in the development stages for some time, which is the catastrophic global climate change that you're going to hear talked about in the papal encyclical that's coming up. And by the way, it's scheduled for the 15th of June. Okay, so it's June 15th that the papal encyclical is going to be issued. And I just want you to keep your eye on it, because my guess is that despite the fact that it's going to be a major statement from the Vatican, you can imagine that the major corporate-owned media, who are huge corporations, are going to try to figure out how to refrain from reporting on it. Whereas I believe that the Vatican and a lot of the allies in the environmental area, et cetera, and of course the internet and the blogs, et cetera, are going to pick it up very quickly. And my guess is that it's going to be impossible for the major media to refuse to acknowledge that this has happened. And they're probably going to focus on the fact that there's such a profound and fundamental critique of the corporate capitalist economic system. But the subject matter is going to be principally the catastrophic, onrushing global climate change that needs to be halted, and the fact that the major meeting is coming up in Paris on November 28th to December 11th, in which the nation states have promised that they would impose mandatory and legally enforceable constraints on the corporations from pumping all of the global greenhouse gas emissions into the environment. So that's the crisis that I've identified as step one in the 12-step analysis. The second step that you need to clearly identify what you believe to be the proximate causation of this major crisis. The concept of proximate causation is a legal concept. What it means is that with regard to any major huge event that takes place, there may be a number of contributing factors in phenomena that go into causing a particular event to take place. But in Western civilization, at least, in the legal system that's been developed, they've identified a concept of proximate causation. That is the kind of sine qua non, that if but for this particular event, that it wouldn't have happened. And with this event taking place, it probably would have happened without any of the other factors. And you have to be able to sort through it. And in this particular instance, with regard to the potential catastrophic global climate change, I've identified the proximate causation of this as Caucasian, nation-state-based, transnational corporate capitalism. That the functioning of this particular economic system has made this crisis virtually inevitable. As will be talked about by Francis, is going to be talking about the fact that there are fundamental elements of the transnational corporate capitalist system that make the acquisition and consumption of natural resources an absolute necessity in order to continue to generate the excess profit by taking the natural resources and putting them through the maw of the capitalist equipment, and in blending that with labor of people in generating excess value, and that's where the profits are reaped by the capitalists, the coupon clippers the stockholders in the corporation. So I've identified that particular phenomenon as the proximate causation of the onrushing strategic crisis that's going to be occurring. The third thing that you need to do is you need to identify what the strategic objective is that you believe you can identify as the means by which to address and remedy this proximate causation. And in our particular instance, I've suggested that the deconstruction of the structural sources of injustice in Western civilization and in Eastern civilization as well is what needs to be undertaken strategically. And in this particular case, we're talking about replacing the transnational corporate capitalist economic system with some other ecologically sensitive system of economics, of people developing the necessities of life and being able to distribute them either outside of their family at least, unless you develop everything that you need for your family, that there'll be some kind of means of exchange of the goods and services that individuals and their families produce, so that the third item, the third step that needs to be taken in this 12-step process is replacing this transnational corporate capitalist system with some alternative economic system and some ecologically sensitive system. For example, this weekend, as it turns out, down at Pomona College, down in Claremont, there's a major conference that's going to be going on. Actually starts tonight. It just after we get done with our section, so you'll have time to get down there if you're not writing your paper. I mean, if you've got it all done already, and all you have to do is put some touches on it. There's a major gathering. It's called, organized by a group called Pando Populus. And they're going to be having major speakers in discussing how we can establish an alternative economic system to the present transnational corporate capitalist economic system, one that can allow us to develop the resources that are necessary, but do it in an ecologically sensitive manner. So that's the step 3. Is identifying the specific strategic objective that you have in mind to try to address and remedy the proximate causation for the major crisis that we're talking about. Step 4 would be to identify the tactical means, the specific tactical means by which you can achieve that particular strategic objective. For example, in our case, I would be talking about the elimination of corporations, of getting rid of corporations, prohibit the states or the federal government from granting these special charters that give these unique and special privileges to a given business group that can actually own all the shares of a company, but have absolutely no legal responsibility for anything that the company does. Okay? And that we need to eliminate the debt-based currency, which started out, at least back in ancient times, as a simple medium of exchange, so that there could be some kind of certificate or item that could be representative of a particular product, so that you didn't have to carry around, 16 pecks of potatoes on your back in order to travel through someone's territory, that you in fact could have. It's okay. You could have some sort of certificate or a coin or something that in fact represented such actual things of value, which were all stored somewhere where the person to whom you gave the medium of exchange could, if they chose to do so, exchange those things. That we need to establish some sort of alternative mechanism to the Federal Reserve System that is generating the vast wealth that's accumulating in the hands of a very few, and basically impoverishing so many other people. And so that there's the tactical means by which I believe we can move to address this issue of the transnational corporate capitalist economic system is to deal with those two major things tactically. Number 5 is, once we've gotten the strategic problem identified, the tactical means of addressing it, that we have to have specific logistical steps that you would propose be taken to effectuate those particular tactical objectives. In this particular case, for example, overturning Citizens United, taking away from the corporations this right that they have now to allegedly exercise the authority of people, that they've been given constitutional rights, among which are to give as much money as they want to the political candidates, to basically bribe them into doing what they want for their own corporate interests. We have to pass state and federal legislation altering the ability of the states or the federal government to grant corporations these charters. We have to figure out a way of limiting the amount of funding that can be given to political candidates in a democracy by outside parties to finance their elections, which is not prohibiting a given individual person if they want to spend their own money to campaign for an office. They have the right to do whatever they want in that case. But if in fact there are other people, you can grab a seat anywhere here, Dylan and Laura. Go ahead. So we want to be able to. One of the other logistical steps that we need to take is prohibiting the outside funding for these elections, which also would probably call for the actual public financing of elections. And there's a whole set of discussions going on about that, which is that if in fact you want to run for a particular public office, the city council in Santa Barbara or Santa Cruz, or any of the other cities in the state, what you do is you have to get a petition signed by people who are registered voters or citizens of that area. And if you get a certain set number of signatures to your petition, then in fact you bring it in and you are automatically entitled to the funding for a campaign. And that all of the candidates who qualify by getting the adequate number of petitions signed would be candidates for that office. And they would all get an equal amount of money or whatever other means we have of giving them the ability to get access to the kind of resources they would need to do the campaign. And so that public financing of the campaigns is one of the many logistical steps that I'm suggesting should be undertaken to try to break the hold of these corporations. We also, I believe, as a fourth item, this is under step 5, we need to create a new progressive political party. That the fact of the matter is we need to have a structural, systematic organization or association of people that can systematically advocate particular policies that would effectuate these ends. Because we're in a democracy that my assumptions are, in addressing this major crisis that's getting ready to befall us as a human family, that the democratic process is a good process. It's a legitimate process. So long as we have constitutional safeguards that protect individuals against the tyranny of the majority. But since I believe we have at least an adequate theoretical system of constitutional safeguards, that the granting over unto a political majority in a democracy of the ability to make these decisions is an important one. And so therefore, if that process is going to be endorsed, then what we need to do is have a progressive political party organized. Now, in fact, as you might well guess from the discussions we've had for the full quarter of this course, that I would actually recommend that there be 7 political parties, so that the adherents to each of the kind of systemic worldviews would actually have a political party. They could actually identify what the underlying assumptions are of their entire cosmology. They can articulate what their ontological assumptions are about the nature of human consciousness and the degree of free will that we have, what the nature of human nature, as they refer to human, what kind of human nature are they assuming as one of the underlying premises of their political philosophy. Do they believe people are inherently bad, inherently stingy and selfish and self-seeking, or do they believe that people are inherently good? There are certain underlying assumptions of a worldview that political party and its members would be perfectly free and encouraged to openly announce. Okay, so that's the 4th step. So I think that there should, in fact, be a full spectrum of political parties. This has just saying, Sophia. This has the answer. We're going to talk about all of these things in the context of your individual papers and in the context of this particular thesis. But I just want to get them all out in front of us now, so we have them in front of us. The additional benefit of these number of political parties is that, in fact, deprives the central government, or for that matter, it deprives any government of a certain kind of artificial stability that once they get elected, that you basically can't do anything until the next cycle, the next electoral cycle. Whereas in this particular instance, if you have a number of these political parties, if you have a full spectrum of the 7 political parties, that is until the 8th paradigm worldview, the post-extraterrestrial contact worldview comes online, that these political parties that we have would in fact have to form coalitions. Once for example, in the United States Congress, the House of Representatives, you have 435 members elected out of these 435 congressional districts. If in fact you had 100 of these congressional districts won by people from one party, another 100 congressional districts won by one of the other parties, and another 100 districts won by a third party, that if you had a more even division of the worldview and the political party that came to ascendancy in each congressional district, when those 435 men and women arrived in Washington, they would have to figure out some way of developing coalitions to support particular legislation. They wouldn't be able to just ramrod something through, such as W. Bush was able to do. Just because they said that W. Bush won the election, that he won the election and they won the majority of seats in the House of Representatives, all of the chairmanships of every single one of the committees all fell into the hands of these right-wing Republicans. And you had a right-wing Republican president, so they were able to do this ridiculous thing of basically, invading the Middle Eastern oil fields under the ruse of the fact that they thought that Saddam Hussein was going to blow us up with an atomic bomb. And even though a substantial majority of people in the country didn't agree with doing that, they had the artificial stability that enabled them to run through and do it. So the advantage in having a multi-party system like this, which was tracking the worldviews, so that their political positions would have integrity and consistency and at least internal self-referential rationality to them, this would be a logistical step that would be helpful to take in order to effectuate the tactical means that we want to address of eliminating corporations and eliminating the debt-based currency system of the Federal Reserve. So we'll get to all these, Sophia. Okay? And then the other one under step 5 are the logistical steps that need to be taken. I would suggest that we have to try to develop some type of alternative medium of exchange, and I'm suggesting that what we might have is a bioregionally organized. If you don't know what that means, there are a number of bioregions on the planet, approximately 215 or so, that there are bioregions that are kind of self-identified by the organic functioning of our planet. That there's a certain kind of river basin with its tributaries that all occur. There's certain river valleys that exist. There are certain forested areas where the people all live. There are bioregions that are sort of self-identified by the natural biological processes of the planet, which tend to be much more rational in a way than these boxes that kind of get superimposed, for example, in the Middle East, by the committee that Winston Churchill chaired back in 1922, where he just sort of placed boxes, on over the entire historical tribal areas, so that a tribe historically tends to evolve within a particular bioregion, and that's how they become historically over time a tribe, and that what might well be developed is a method by means of which the residents in a given bioregion would be able to exchange the products that they were able to raise in whatever way that they chose to do so inside their bioregion. They could exchange the excess of those products for other products which they have a surfeit of in their community, that they don't have the ability to raise certain things, and so they would be able to exchange the excess of things that they had with other communities. And I'm suggesting that given the access we have now to computers and technologies and the internet, etc., what we could do is expand upon things like eBay that they have now. That there's a way, I believe, that we could see our way through to actually setting up a process by means of which people over distances could exchange goods and services, for that matter, with people from other bioregions. So these are just a number of the kind of logistical steps, the kind of things that one would think about if one were attempting to effectuate the tactical objective of eliminating corporations and eliminating the present debt-based currency system that we have through the Federal Reserve. Now, a sixth step in the 12-step process of developing a full thesis as to how you would identify and address the given crisis that you're going to choose to write your thesis about. The sixth thing that you would want to do is, in attempting to effectuate the logistical steps and the tactical steps in pursuit of the strategic objectives that you've got, the sixth thing you'd want to do is you'd want to identify your principal allies. You'd like to see who your allies are who are going to cooperate with you in attempting to effectuate these logistical, tactical, and strategic objectives. And in this particular case, of what we'd be looking at, for example, just by way of example, is that this major alliance between the millennial generation, your generation, and mine, the baby boomer generation, which has been talked about, for example, in that sociological study of generations, a history of America's future. Because they talk about this. We're going to get to all these things, Tyler. Make notes now. Make notes. Just keep shaking your head, but make your notes. Okay. Then we'll talk about all these things. In fact, I'll pick you second after Sophia. She's shot her hand. I was just keeping her from having to hold her hand up for the whole period because it gets very tired. I've noticed that in the classes. We just make our list here. Okay. Now what they talk about there is that they're asserting, and it's just a thesis. You have to be able to evaluate it yourself. There's a thesis that they're asserting is that there is a pattern that has displayed itself historically over and over again here in the United States of a natural alliance occurring between an idealistic generation that rises every 100 years and a civic generation that rises every 100 years. And that in the face of a major kind of disruptive crisis that occurs, whether it was the Glorious Revolution that drove the pilgrims out of Europe and coming to North America to escape religious persecution, to the American Revolution in the next cycle, to the American Civil War in the next cycle, to the massive depression in World War II that occurred in the fourth cycle, that the argument is that they've made is that in each and every one of those instances, the idealist generation of that particular cycle bonded with the civic generation of that same 100-year cycle, in that they formed an alliance pursuant to which they came to address the crisis, to come to some consensus between the two generations what the proximate causation of the crisis was and how to effectively address it. So I'm suggesting that one of the very first ally groups that you'd want to look to here in attempting to respond to this crisis during your lifetime would be the members of the boomer generation and the members of the millennial generation, because sociologically you're wasting your time if you're trying to recruit a whole lot of X generation people, mainly because they don't give a shit about what's happening. You know, they're busy making lots of money and still trying to survive in the stock market so they can buy another MG or BMW. You know, and so that while in fact that might be perceived as being a little unfair, primarily by members of the X generation, that all I'm suggesting is that William Strauss and Neil Howe, who wrote and did the study, believe that it is a fair characterization in general of that generation, which are in fact a reactive generation, that they're reacting in response to the idealist generation, and that it's under the whip hand actually of the civic generation of the previous cycle, has basically persuaded the members of the reactive generation that they should not in fact work with or support the members of the idealist generation, because they're too fuzzy-headed and idealistic and unrealistic and impractical, and that therefore the members of the reactive generation should plight their troth with the elders of the previous civic generation. In this case, the X generation basically signing on with the World War II generation now to work in the stock markets and to try to maintain the major corporate capitalist structure in place right now. Another group, if in fact in my particular case, given the particular strategic crisis that I've identified and the particular proximate causation of it, another natural ally for this particular endeavor that I'm talking about as a hypothetical thesis, so that you can see it as a template in doing your work on your thesis, would be to work with, for example, the members of the progressive caucus in the House of Representatives. There are some 63 members of the House of Representatives that are members of the Progressive Caucus. They've gone to the lengths of actually creating a Progressive Caucus. This was done by Dennis Kucinich and Barbara Lee. Barbara Lee being the congressional representative from Berkeley, and Dennis Kucinich having been the representative from the 10th Congressional District in Ohio, who were the co-chairs of the Progressive Caucus. These 63 people in the United States House of Representatives are all self-conscious progressives, and they all, not coincidentally, happen to come from university towns, where there are major universities where people still read books, carry on intelligent conversation, and actually think systematically, or are at least being trained to do so. Okay, so that this is another group that we would identify under my particular thesis to identify, to work with. And also, therefore, one would work with college students and college faculty people, because they have been consistently identified over time as your communities who are interested in progressive change. because they're involved in education, and the education is ideally intended to assist people in figuring out how to be creative in the face of crises to engage in progressive change. Now, there are counter arguments, of course, and you can make them, and we will talk about it when I get done here in the first 4 or 5 minutes that I'm taking to do this, that there will be people who argue that obviously if you're dealing with a state university, you suffer from the same problems of a state-funded high school. And that is, if the educational system is funded by the state, they will definitely and surely attempt to train you into being minions of the state. That they'll be constantly training you not to be creative thinkers. They'll be constantly training you to obey authority, respect authority. So there are counter arguments to this, but the reality is that consistently in sociological studies, they find that the college campuses and the college faculties are in fact among the most progressive people in the country. So this would be another natural ally that we would look for in our particular case. Another set of allies would be, in my opinion, other adherents to the natural law worldview. So you go looking for the kind of people that might be adherents to the natural law worldview. So what you go looking for is people who view themselves to be spiritual. Because as I've talked about before, the charisms and faculties of human beings who actually are disposed toward the natural law worldview tend to view themselves as spiritual, because they're conflating these kind of sixth paradigm experiences that they're having, these kind of numinous experiences, these unitive experiences. They're conflating those with spiritual events. And so that they self-consciously identify themselves as, quote, spiritual people. You will in fact find them saying, yes, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. You hear that a lot. In fact, I just had a major debate over the weekend on one of the panels I was on with people who just kept insisting that they didn't want to pay any attention to anything that the Catholic Pope said, in his encyclical, because he was part of an institutional religion, and that all institutional religions are bad. The Catholic Church is particularly bad because they've earned the reputation, I might add. But the fact of the matter is there's lots of people who view themselves as spiritual people, and they tend to be progressive. Okay? And so that if in fact you're attempting to undertake a progressive response to a particular crisis, that these are people you might look to as allies under the 6th step in the 12-step program, is in gathering your allies. And I would suggest to you that if you're looking for a progressive response to the crisis you're going to identify, another group that you might take a look at are the groups they call the social ministry people in the established churches. That there's an entire apostolate within the church communities which are called social ministry groups. And so that for example, the Washington Interreligious Staff Council that we ended up putting together back in 1975 is actually the group of social ministry officers for the various churches of the top 54 religious denominations in the United States. And they are almost uniformly progressive people. There are people who are concerned about the social problems. They're concerned about the existence of nuclear weapons. They're concerned about the huge amounts of money that are spent on weaponry by the United States. They're concerned about war. They're concerned about environmental contamination. They share a whole set of progressive values, and that they tend to camp out in these social ministry offices. Because they get a chance to explain what they believe in. They have a vehicle and institutional setting within which they can operate. They have some of the legitimacy of the institution of the church, which enables them to go into their community and talk about these progressive views without people necessarily assuming that they're communists. that there are advantages to working in the social ministry offices of these groups. So one of the groups is the Washington Interreligious Staff Council that you might look to. The National Council of Churches, actually. The National Council of Churches is a considerably liberal to progressive grouping of churches. The Union of American Hebrew Congregations is sort of a gathering place for progressive people in the Jewish community, as distinct from sort of the Orthodox Jewish people, in the same way that the Jesuits inside the Catholic Church are much, much more progressive than, say, the people who are in Opus Dei, or in the Knights of Columbus, or the Knights of Malta, or any of those other knights that they have. And of course, then there's always the Unitarians. The Unitarians, I remember that I was doing a presentation to the Unitarians at their convention, and I like in the first 2 or 3 minutes of the talk that I was doing, I was recognizing that I wasn't getting the kind of response from the audience that I was anticipating, the kind of nonverbal, emotional response that you get from a group like you guys, and then I realized that I was talking to them as though they were Christians, and it turns out that Unitarians are not Christians, and so then I realized that Father Bill Davis had told me that Unitarians were people that believed in the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, in the neighborhood of Boston. And then actually I was in Boston talking to them, so I wasn't, at least I knew I was in the right town. But bottom line is that Unitarians are in fact generally very progressive. And so that if you're looking for a progressive solution to the strategic crisis that you're identifying in your thesis, in your paper you're preparing, that you might think of looking to the Unitarians for people that might be willing to help you. Now, there's also, of course, the very famous Board of Homeland Ministries of the National Methodist Church. These are the people that actually created the Chautauqua movement back in 1874 and 1878. They created the Chautauqua movement, which we've talked about a number of times here, that generated the women's suffrage movement, that generated the American Labor Union movement, that generated the anti-child labor statutes, that generated the post-Civil War civil rights movement. They generated the initial environmental movement. There's a whole series of social movements that they generated in our country, primarily in response to the robber barons who were raping and pillaging throughout the country at the time. And that particular group of people organized themselves and established the Chautauqua, which in fact was not attempting to recruit people into becoming Methodists. And it wasn't attempting to recruit them into becoming Christians. It was just in fact trying to recruit them into recognizing if they adhered to the basic Judeo-Christian social ethical principles. Or if they didn't have to come to the meetings. But if they did, that's what they were trying to. They were trying to get people to be stimulated in their recognition of and elucidation of what those values were, so they could come to a conscious recognition of the fact that they were contrary to what the robber barons were doing. Okay, so that these are some of the groups that you would want to establish as your allies. And of course, there's also the progressive media outlets. Now you have National Public Radio. You have a lot of the, now we have a lot of the blogs and stuff. They've got Intercept, which is Glenn Greenwald and who else is there? There's 3 or 4 of them that are there now. They're progressive journalists who have formed this particular website where they provide the news to you each day on Intercept that is from a progressive perspective. And of course, there's Amy Goodman in the morning. If you don't want to cut your wrists every morning on the way to work, then You have to have somebody waiting at your office or at school when you get there after listening to this to cheer you up. But she does have a very progressive perspective on what the state of the world is at any given time in the morning. So there are various types of media outlets that you can resort to if in fact you're attempting to organize your allies to respond in a progressive manner to the particular crisis that you're identifying. And of course they've got the Progressive magazine. So there are places where you can go, but the sixth step that you should take in attempting to develop your thesis about what the particular series of responses are that you need to have to a particular crisis that you've identified, that's step number 6. Number 7 is what you have to do is you have to start identifying your resources that you have at your disposal in order to attempt to organize and identify your allies, in order to move to try to put into effect your tactical decisions. You're going to have resources. And the first and most important resource is your personnel. This is part of the reason why, for example, we have the opportunity for you to be an intern at the Romero Institute if you wanted to do that. And it's the reason that the school has this in the community services, whatever that, there's a community, what is it? There's a department here, right? It's called Community Studies, right? The Community Studies actually has you go and work with a public interest organization in the community, right? And so that you get this kind of experience. Well, one of the things you need to do in pursuit of effectuating your thesis is you need to find personnel. These are in addition to your allies that we talked about under step 6, your actual personnel are people who will come and work with you. That they'll show up, they'll be there in the morning, and you can sit down and have meetings together to figure out what your next step is. You can have them share with you things that they've picked up during the last 24 hours on the news, or reading things or thinking about things. They can come together and share these things so that you have actual personnel who are working with you. And you can become familiar with their strengths and their weaknesses. All of us have strengths and weaknesses. There are various kinds of talents that they bring to the table. And you can begin to work with them and recognize what those are so that you can make collective decisions as to how to distribute the workload among people who are the most capable. And it's not an embarrassment that a particular person isn't particularly good at a particular thing, so that you don't give one person all the assignments. You divide them up among those who have the charisms that are appropriate. Then there is the big challenge here is the material resources. The key to gathering together the material resources that you're going to need to do your work, to attempt to effectuate these logistical, tactical, and strategic steps that you need to take. You need to have resources. You need to have a place to perhaps come to gather together, or you need to have computers pursuant to which you can actually communicate with each other and have sort of a virtual set of meetings to communicate with each other. You need to have potential computers to communicate with other people in other organizations. You need to be able to type things up. You need to be able to distribute things. There's a whole set of material resources that you need to have. One of the things you want to be careful about is you don't want to believe that you need a lot more resources, material resources, than you actually do need. Because that's one of the big challenges to organizations is they start to think that they need more and more resources, they get more and more resources, and then they need more and more money to sustain the resources, and then they end up compromising their ideals in order to get the money. And this happens over and over and over again. For example, you had the big hoodoo that came down inside Greenpeace. Greenpeace started out as being a bunch of really rugged, aggressive individuals that were trying to protect the environment, and they got to be very, very popular, and then they started getting lots of contributions coming into them, and then they hired staff and they got buildings, and once they got the people on staff, of course the people that were in the staff, since they were conscious people, started saying, well, we have to have certain medical benefits, we have to have certain retirement benefits, we have, and they started becoming kind of institutionalized, and the in-place fixed needs of the organization became more and more, and so they had to reach out and do more and more fundraising, and then they had to reach out to broader and broader groups of funders, and then those funders they reached out and actually tapped into more conservative supporters. And then the conservative supporters started getting upset about the fact that they were going up and putting their ships in front of the other ships that were killing seals or gill netting tuna, so that they were killing dolphins, and so then a whole set of disputes broke out inside the organization among the more conservative people and the more progressive people. So in taking this step number 7, in pursuing the effectuation of your thesis, you need to be constantly vigilant about the state of balance that you want to strike between the need for more resources and the need to maintain the ideals of your organization. Okay? Now, the 8th step is you have to identify the principal obstacles, the challenges, the principal challenges that you're going to confront. We started raising some of these last Tuesday right away as we started to work our way through this thesis. But the number 1 challenge or obstacle that we're going to have under this particular thesis, if one accepts the fact that the global climate change is the major strategic crisis and that corporate capitalism is in fact the proximate causation of it, one of the major obstacles we're going to have to try to pursue and carry into successful completion the steps that we've identified as the logistical, tactical, and strategic steps we need to take is the construction of a national security state. The construction of the national security state by the major forces of corporate capitalism is going to be a major challenge because they're basically armed and dangerous. They in fact carry arms and they're violent and they're trained to be violent, and they have a disposition toward violence. And when they encounter people who simply disagree with them, they become violent. And anybody who not only disagrees with them but actually tries to do something about it, they become even more violent because they feel that they're being challenged, to the point where you see things like in Ferguson, where the highly militarized police department, that were going around in tanks that had been provided to them by the military, that had gained their experience by occupying the Middle Eastern oil fields and had been involved in killing thousands of people for years before they then come home and volunteer to be police officers, that they start conceiving of the people that live in the community as their enemies, and that this tends to happen. So that the existence of this national security state apparatus that has been developed since the end of the Cold War with the creation of the National Security Act, that the creation of the CIA, the National Security Agency, the National Security Act of 1947 created these organizations that were explicitly and consciously organized to engage in an aggressive dialectical campaign to kind of wage war on anybody they had to, both overt and covert, in order to establish and maintain the structures of transnational corporate capitalism. That's what their job was. And not coincidentally, it was the lawyers for the major corporations and banks who were called upon to draft up the structure of the Central Intelligence Agency. And so that these descending groups as part of the national security state, we began to see how they really wanted to have these things organized. I mentioned to you when Ronald Reagan was governor of California, and he commissioned this major undertaking that was called Operation Cable Splicer, in which they were talking about splicing together the United States military forces with the state police officers in California, with the local sheriff's departments, with the local city police departments, and that they were trying to organize, they were trying to splice them all together into a unified fighting machine. In that particular case, it was preparing for the possibility that the anti-war people, the anti-Vietnam War students, would join forces with the black nationalists in California in an attempt to overthrow the government of California. Now, setting aside the fact that it's kind of a fantasy world that they're living in, that just makes them more dangerous. You know, so the agents of this national security state are a particular type of character. They tend to recruit out of the reactionary worldview adherents. They will sprinkle in some authoritarian types from the first paradigm worldview, but they in fact they hang out together all the time, and they reinforce each other. And so excuse me, are you guys paying attention here? Come on, it's been going on the entire class. So you just got to pay some attention, okay? Thanks. Okay, no. So the existence of this national security state is a major challenge to anybody who is going to be attempting to move to alter the major economic system of transnational corporate capitalism. No matter how dangerous that economic system is, no matter what the consequences are to our environment of their activities, the fact of the matter is that the members of the national security state have been trained and retained to in fact sustain that in the face of any efforts to change it. And they will view even completely democratic processes of attempting to change that as adversarial. Okay, so that is a major challenge. A second major challenge that we have to effectuating this particular set of logistical, tactical, and strategic steps to address this major coming crisis is the fact that the news media are owned by the very same owners of these major transnational corporate capitalist corporations. So you've got NBC is owned by General Electric, which makes the engines for most of the fighter planes and other equipment that the military uses all the time. ABC is owned by Cap City, this major financial group, the chairman of which was Bill Casey, who was the CIA director. You've got these major challenges because with the major media being, to say nothing about Fox News, which is about as much as they deserve, to say nothing about them. But the bottom line is, they're flagrant about it. That Rupert Murdoch, this kind of cretin who owns it and bought it and has now bought the Wall Street Journal. That basically he gets up every morning and writes out a set of bullet point positions that he wants everybody in his news system to be proselytizing on behalf of, and they basically have to do what he says or else they get fired. So what they do is they hire people that are inclined to want to say those kind of things anyhow. Okay? And so that you get this kind of constant barrage of right-wing propaganda, this reactionary propaganda. But on the other hand, you get propaganda from the other channels as well. It just isn't quite so flagrant. And so therefore, it's even, one might argue, more dangerous because people make the mistake of turning on those channels, even if they don't turn on Fox News. So this ownership of the major news media is a challenge. Now we have on the other side, of course, we have control still over the internet. And so we can establish alternative news stations, alternative entertainment stations, and everything, because even the entertainment that is put on these major networks is filled with violence and subliminal messaging to you that, in fact, the way to solve problems is to kill them. So that virtually 9 out of every 10 shows that you see on the major networks, unless they're insipid, situation comedies. You know, that what they have is they have somebody carrying guns around all the time who are the protagonists who end up shooting and killing the bad guy. And that's how it resolves itself. And so that these are subliminal propaganda activities on the part of the corporations that own those major media. So their news delivery systems are self-consciously designed to propagandizing us. So now a third challenge that we have in effectuating this particular thesis is that some of our people will be filled with fear at the prospects of changing this system because they have come to be reliant upon it. The whole idea of somehow, for example, if in fact Francis were to feel compelled on December 8th in announcing his Jubilee year to actually explicate the fact that they should cancel all the debt on the planet, if this were to substantially disrupt the debt-based currencies, that some people will say, I remember that Sarah, you raised these concerns yourself, that what about, how are we going to, we won't have any money. You know, we're locked in our house. We don't have any money to pay for gas to go to the store. We don't have any money to buy groceries at the supermarket. You know, what are we going to do? You know, the fact of the matter is that most people won't be willing to work their way through it like Sarah is, and we all work trying to figure out solutions to that. What they'll do is they'll basically just squat down and cry, and they'll feel freaked out. And what they'll do is they'll refuse to cooperate with other people. They'll refuse to voluntarily participate in the rethinking of the economic system. In participating in some kind of bartering system, they won't do that. What they'll do is they'll refuse to cooperate unless you give them money. I mean, almost anybody who won't do the right thing unless you pay them money, you shouldn't be paying them the money anyhow, because you basically don't want those kind of people around. You know, a person who will in fact do things because they want to, those are the kind of people that you want to work with and you want to bring in and you want to share resources and stuff with those people because they were the ones that can achieve their tasks, okay? So everybody make notes now when you get to a spot where you have a question here. Just make notes so you won't forget it, because I want to talk about all these things, obviously. And we can talk about them both in the specific as they relate to this particular thesis, or we can talk about them in general as they relate to your thesis, okay? Now, one of the other dangerous aspects about a portion of our people, and when I'm talking about the people, I'm talking about our regular people, like us, you know, that aren't, you know, fat-ass corporate capitalists and bankers and or militants, you know, who work for, you know, Blackwater. You know, we're regular people. That one of the dangers is that some portion of our regular people will, in fact, become traitors to the people. They will, in fact, you know, participate with you in your activities and will rat you out. They will, in fact, run right straight to the corporate capitalists or to the police or to the national security state people and tell everybody what you're doing. So this, in fact, presents an additional challenge, and that is that you have to make certain that in organizing and doing the things that you're doing, that you have to always be aware of the fact that whatever it is that you're planning on doing, it's very possible that the other side is going to find out. Okay? So you need to know that. So that what you try to do is you try to develop as many of your activities as you possibly can that are right straightforward, that there's nothing they can do about it. You know, you say we're going to organize and we're going to bring 1 million people to Washington, D.C., you know, on December 10th, and we're going to march down the middle of the street, and you just keep right on coming. And so even though they know you're coming and they try to take steps to head you off, you just keep right on coming. And so that what you want to do is you want to, therefore, have as much as possible of your tactics that you're taking, that as much as possible of being such that even though they're publicly exposed as to what you're going to be doing, you can still do them. Okay? So that's a challenge, because lots of regular people will, in fact, go right to the authorities and tell them what you're doing because they're afraid. Okay? Now, a fourth major challenge that we have in this, of course, is that the corporations and the two major political parties will join forces to stop us from being successful. I mean, because obviously we're talking about dismantling the corporation. We're talking about taking away their corporate privileges and making them conduct their business in a way in which they'll be directly legally responsible for the decisions they're making. And boy, they do not want to do that at all. And so they will, in fact, go right directly to the two main political parties, to say nothing about going to the members of the national security state, to attempt to stop you from doing it. Okay? And so these are substantial forces. The people who own the corporations and the people who own the news media and the people that run the two major political parties, these are fairly substantial forces. But it's important that you remember virtually all of their power derives directly from you cooperating with them, from you affirming their authority. You're depending upon them to do something for you. Okay? And that's the stock in trade of those people. And so that the development of this sense of independence and self-reliance and the ability to rely upon your sisters and brothers to cooperate with you in achieving your objectives is essential. Okay? That's the key thing that is our asset. It's our secret resource. Okay? Now, so that not only are they going to be attempting to stop you, but they'll do it in a particular way. What they will do is they will vilify you. And so you have to be prepared for this. They're going to be, in their propaganda machines, the news media and everything else, and their corporate expenditures and the political parties, what they're going to do is they're going to vilify you as somehow being evil or malignant, or they're going to try to figure out how to make you come off looking like you're the bad guy. So that people who have been trained in a completely Pavlovian way to respond to the stimuli of their authoritarian leaders will in fact just knee-jerk respond by thinking you're a bad guy. This is a very specific tactic that they will in fact devise. That you will become the dartboard of the month. Like they used to have, here's Osama bin Laden. They put him up in every bar where people shoot darts at them. Or the Ayatollah, Khomeini, put the dartboard on him, Or Saddam Hussein, who is it this week? And what they do is they caricaturize and vilify you, so that you have to be prepared for that happening. So you can't just go, they're saying bad things about me. People go, I don't want people to say bad things about me. You've been trained your whole life to want people to like you. And so the minute they start characterizing you as a bad guy, some people will fold their tent and go home. So you have to be prepared for that ahead of time, And there'll be special training sessions so you can train yourself to be unresponsive to that. Okay. Now, one of the biggest challenges that we're going to have, and this is one that is a no-brainer, but it's going to be how to get access to the material resources that we need without money. Okay. And I might add for all of you here, without your credit card. Okay. You aren't going to have the money, which is basically just a debt certificate. And you aren't going to have your credit card, because you can bet, might I say, your bottom dollar, that they are going to cancel your credit cards if you start participating in this type of a movement. And so that we have to develop, pursuant to this particular thesis, dealing with this particular crisis, pursuing these particular logistical, tactical, and strategic objectives that I'm identifying here, that seem to me to be quite naturally obvious in attempting to effectuate this objective, is that that we have to figure out how to gain access to and reliable access to the kind of resources, the material resources that we are going to have. Okay? So that's a challenge that we have to do. Now, number 9, we're close now because this is 9 out of the 12 step. You need to take steps now that you've identified your allies. Okay? You need to take steps to organize and mobilize your allies. That's the role of the Chautauqua movement. That's the first step, I think, under this step number 9. We need to, I would believe, regenerate the Chautauqua movement. Taking all of our lessons from that time, but modernizing them now in light of the improved communication systems that we have, the transportation systems that we have, etc. To look into and familiarize yourself that, you know, when you get done writing your thesis and you hand it in and you all get your A's and A pluses on your theses here, and you leave here, unless you're going to come and be an intern at the Romero Institute, that you have to realize that you're going to be taking this with you out into the world, this thesis that you've developed, and you're going to be using it as a referent for how you're going to be responding in the future when this crisis that you've identified, if you identify a proper one, starts to come into being. And you're going to start to reflect back upon this. I'm suggesting that one of the resources that you want to look to is the reestablishment of this Chautauqua movement. So that you want to participate in the reestablishment of this Chautauqua movement, almost no matter what the crisis is that you're identifying. Okay? Because as I pointed out, the Chautauqua movement gave rise to very different major social movements in the country that were designed to address and remedy a distinct social policy problem. You know, the disenfranchisement of women, the continued racial discrimination against black people, the abuse and exploitation of children and child labor, the denigration of the environment. You know, these were different movements, but they were all being engined by the robber barons. So that the identification of those guys as the ones doing this thing helped generate certain different kind of movements. Okay, so that even if you identify different crises in your theses, all of you, I think, are going to find it to be in your common interest to look to the Chautauqua movement, become familiar with what the Chautauqua movement was, think about how you would update the Chautauqua movement, and how you would take advantages of the new technology in communications and transportation, etc. How would you utilize that to modernize the Chautauqua movement? Okay, I also I've identified already who the different ally groups are that you would like to look to. But for example, some of the obvious ones that you'd like to look to, potentially the labor unions. Some of the labor unions that have survived the Reagan counterattack on labor unions, the UE, you know, the United Electrical Workers, the SEIU, the Service Employees International Union. SEIU is probably the most progressive union now, and they organize hospital workers and workers in stores and stuff like that. SEIU is a very progressive union. And they have been active in lots of the political campaigns, and they would be natural allies. The feminist organizations, one of the important things to understand, as you know, as women, that you know that the kind of systematic discrimination that you're still being subjected to are all part of the need for a major social change. And that you know that, in fact, the same people that fill those corporate boardrooms with the stockholders, they are still misogynists for the most part. That's absolutely true. You know, that's why R. Crumb had that great headcomic of Ruby Goldberg and her all-girl commandos. He used to go in and kick in the doors of the corporations and drag them out in the street and throw them in the street and take over the business. That we haven't seen them for a while, but that was a very popular group back in the 60s and 70s. Now, that obviously for this particular thesis that we're working on, this particular crisis of the global climate change, the environmental groups, the 501c3 public interest environmental groups are natural allies. So what you'd want to do is you'd want to identify, pursuant to and concurrent with the nature of your particular crisis that you're identifying in your thesis, you'd like to try to identify the 501c3 public interest groups that work in that particular area, because they're going to be the ones who have a lot of the research and resources and all that stuff that you'd want to partner up with to work on. And the fact of the matter is that most any of your progressive movements, if you're going to be working on the resolution of one of these crises, you'd look to your anti-war movement, the peace movement, that most of the people that are involved in the anti-war movement are becoming more and more conscious of the fact that the wars are fought primarily for the interests of the capitalists, and that they're engined by these major corporations. And so that they are natural allies of you if you're attempting to work on an issue that is recognizing this corporate capitalist structure as one of the proximate causations of your problem. Okay? And so the 10th step is to identify the steps, and this is obviously the big one. What are the steps that need to be taken to overcome the specific obstacles and challenges that you have identified back under step 5? And then in this particular case, since the existence of the national security state apparatus is one of the principal challenges that we've got and the obstacles we have to deal with, the eliminating and the disassembly of the national security state is one of the principal steps that needs to be taken to protect ourselves in going forward in the movement. Okay? And that one of the ways of doing that is, for example, to openly defy the existence of the National Defense Authorization Act. So that Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act that authorizes the military to come swooping in and rendition you or me or our whole class actually, that could just kick the doors in and swoop us all up, saying they've been watching this on the internet, so they know what's coming. What you want to do is you want to organize a constitutional protection zone. You want to go to the city council members, the members of your county board of supervisors, and you want to get them to pass an ordinance which actually conditions the continued future employment of any one of the employees of the city or county, law enforcement people included, that if in fact they receive any communication from the federal government, any federal or military agency, that they're planning to enforce the National Defense Authorization Act inside our city or our county, that those employees would be duty bound as a condition of their future continued employment to report this to the city council. And under the ordinance, the city council would set up a procedure for providing due process to any person who is being targeted by the federal administration to rendition you and take you into custody and deprive you of the right to counsel, deprive you of the right to habeas corpus, deprive you of the right to a trial by jury, deprive you of the right to even be notified about what the issues are as to why they've retained you. You know, that cannot be tolerated. Your mere tolerance of that statute being in place feeds their confidence. The passivity that people have in the face of knowing that that's in place, they actually write legal briefs. John Yoo, who wrote the legal briefs for the torture authorization in the Cheney administration, you know, these people, he's written a book called the National Security State Constitution, in which he argues that the undertaking of a particular program on the part of the national security state, if they undertake the program and Congress even knows that it's going on and doesn't do anything about it, that's a de facto ratification of that whole process. And therefore, if citizens know about the existence of this whole regime of renditions of American citizens and are not, you don't have to be up in arms over it, but are not at least up and on your feet about it and trying to organize a constitutional protection zone, they read that as affirmation. They read that as ratification on your part, that you're willing to tolerate it because you think it's only going to be used against somebody else. And that's the very first thing that you hear. Well, it's not going to do it against me. You know, they're only talking about, you know, Arab terrorists, you know, or hyphenated American Arab terrorists. You know, that's the headset that people have. But the fact of the matter is, this is exactly how they did it before in Germany. They just bring it on and they enforce it only against the fringes and then work their way back in toward you. Okay? So you have to move early. It was yeah, that's right. It was the mistake even that the White Rose made back in Germany in the late 1920s, is they didn't move fast enough. They didn't get into place fast enough to start mobilizing people. And so that we have to mobilize now against this National Defense Authorization Act and the national security state. We all know they're monitoring your telephones. They now have low-flying drones that can fly over and locate you even if your telephone is off. They can physically locate you by identifying you with your phone number and find you and know exactly where you are. And so they aren't just flying these low-flying airplanes that can discover the marijuana growing in your basement or someone else's basement. They're doing a lot more than that now. They're actually being able to identify you and locate you. And what they can do is they can feed into the computers where you are at any given time, and they can start to work up the patterns of how you normally go about your week, where you are at what time and who you're with, because they can see the other phone numbers with you. Now, I'm telling you that this is the point in time at which we have to mobilize against this while we're still able to do so. Okay? Now, and I believe that we have to take steps to eliminate the FISA court, this Federal Intelligence Act court that's been created to authorize these people to go into the telephone companies and collect all of your contacts and everything else. You know, that the FISA court, as I told you, the FISA court in 36 years has had 3,678 requests made to them, and they've turned down 12. You know, so I mean, it's completely pro forma. You know, the agency going in front of whichever the agency is. You know, and you got the NSA, the National Security Agency. You got DISC. People don't even know what DISC is. How many people here know what DISC is? Right. It's the Defense Industrial Security Command. It's an actual federal agency that exists to defend industry. You know, to protect the major plants of industry around the country. They're civilian corporations that are being provided security by the federal government. Okay? And they got DARPA, and they've got NEST. You don't know what NEST is either. NEST is the Nuclear Emergency Search Teams that are authorized to go anywhere, anytime, and to do anything necessary to recover special nuclear materials that have gone missing. I mean, that's other than the ones that go missing under their hands so they can give them to Israel, in Iran, in South Africa. You know, so that they have these organizations in place that have to be eliminated. They've got to be eliminated. And so that we also have to begin an open process of citizen diplomacy. We cannot sit around waiting for the agents of the major corporations that are funded through them, through the elected representatives, to be the ones that are going to be able to establish peace on the planet, because it's to their advantage to be engaged in wars. So if we're going to do this, we have to begin organizing citizens diplomacy. We have to reach out to people from other countries, for example, China. And you're going to be hearing, without any doubt at all, over the next 3, 4 years, you're going to be, and watch the campaigns, the 2016 electoral campaigns. See how many times you hear them talking about China and how we can't let China get away with this of pirating all of our goods and services, having cyber attacks upon Sony, our corporations. We can't have our corporations being spied on by China. You're going to hear this. So we have to engage in citizens diplomacy to know people from China, get to travel back and forth to China, do the same thing with Russia, the same thing with Cuba, the same thing with India and Japan. We have to take upon ourselves responsibility, not just to go visit those places and sit around, but to actually reach out and know the people and establish citizen diplomacy with them. Okay? And what we have to do eventually is we have to engage in a process of disassembling the militaries. We've got to disassemble the militaries of these countries. This whole operation of having standing armies in place in naval forces and Air Force forces with massive strategic bombers and stuff, that having these things in place all the time, every day they're in place, it's more probable that they're going to be used. And so that what we have to do is take steps to disassemble this entire militarist element on the planet. And we have to do this through citizen diplomacy because it has to be done on a bilateral basis. We can't just sit around and advocate that the entire United States disarm and disassemble all of its weapons, etc., and leave everybody else with them. So there has to be a bilateral process, okay? And we're going to have to start to consider, for some of our element in the room, some of our kids, that general strikes. That a general strike, for example, against Monsanto. A general strike, against Bechtel. A general strike against Halliburton and Kellogg, Brown and Root. A general strike against these people, these corporations that are engaged in these kind of activities, figure out what their products are and boycott them. Not only boycott them, but organize other people to boycott them, to try to do everything in the world that we can do to deprive them of our support. Okay? And you're eventually going to have to boycott the banks. You're going to have to figure out some way, just like they did in Mondragon. Mondragon was, that for those of you who don't know what Mondragon is, you need to look it up. That Mondragon is a little region in Spain and France, right on the border of Spain and France, which effectively seceded from Spain and France at the end, during the build-up to World War II, because they refused to fall under the control of the fascists. So that you had the fascists in Spain under Franco, and you had the fascists under the Vichy French in France. So what they did is they organized their own brand new bank, so that the citizens actually pooled their resources together voluntarily and then gave loans to each other and stuff and helped set up a whole alternative economic system. So we have to start looking to that, to break the addiction to Citibank, to break the addiction to Wells Fargo, to break the addiction that we have to these people, because these are the people who are the allies of the major national security state. Okay? Now, as I say, we have to make certain that we do all of these things in a multilateral manner so that we do not, in fact, give support to the people who have reason to be afraid that if we start to do these things here in our country, that we are going to be vulnerable to potential aggression by China or Russia or even North Korea or any of the other boogeymen that they have, or to say nothing about ISIL, We've got to do this in a bilateral way or a multilateral way. So finally, the 12th step, that we have to establish some type of coordinated association. Okay? We have to form some kind of an association which has, in effect, a business structure. It's got a structure with personnel, an organizational structure that can make decisions. You need to, and all I'm talking about is in dealing with your particular crisis. You know, even if you're going to call a general strike and that's all you want to do, you've got to have some kind of an organization or some kind of a process by means of which to do it, or we're going to hear from Tyler as to how you can do it without it. Okay? So that we're going to have an entire hour and a half or something immediately hereafter to discuss all of this and to discuss your theses, where you think, now that you have an outline of the 12 steps that you might need to consider anyway, what questions you have about being able to do this. And so what I'm suggesting is that there is a business model, an organizational structure for all of those of you who are not just simple anarchists. That there's a structural model which is a voluntary membership association. And if you organize a voluntary membership association, which is primarily spiritual in nature, and if you look to the natural law worldview and try to understand the spiritual implications of that, understanding that a good deal of the qualities of the natural law worldview are understood by people to be spiritual charisms, that you organize a spiritually grounded voluntary membership organization or association. And the fact of the matter is, you don't need to register such an organization with anyone. And in fact, you do not have to pay any income tax for any of the monies that you acquire. In fact, other people can make donations to you and deduct it from their income tax, both state and federal and local. And so that there is in fact a voluntary spiritual membership association, which is a business model by means of which you can function. What you need to do is try to figure out whether or not you need a land base from which to function. How well can you function simply in the internet world, the virtual world? But you have to have staff, you have to coordinate the staff, you have to have resources and supplies, you have to develop a method of accessing the media. And what I'm suggesting is what you do, once you've identified all of these other steps, you need to develop like a 5-year plan so that you can actually structure and discipline your conduct. Okay? Now, all of this, needless to say, is predicated upon an assumption that is different from the ideological position of an anarchist. There are others who are going to be arguing that the attempt to try to organize anything on the other side of a general strike or some kind of simple revolt against these people is basically getting caught in reasons to not do it, because you can't figure out the answer to all these things, and so you don't do anything. So what I've done is I've laid out to you now what I think would be the kind of logical 12-step process by means of which you would be able to identify and move on resolving the major crisis that you may think is going to occur in your life. Okay? So that's what the purpose of this course is all about. And we'll get set to go across the street in about 6 or 8 minutes.
I think I may have missed your 11th step.
The 11th one is actually the making certain that you don't do this unilaterally, that you need to do this on a multilateral basis. If we're trying to deal with problems that exist inside our nation state, we have to move on this in a multilateral way to get other nations to cooperate, so that we aren't putting our people at a disadvantage, which is going to give them an argument for not doing it. Okay, so now we've got Sophia and Tyler had your hands up. We're going to go now. Is everybody coming over to the discussion? No, Tyler, you're not coming.
No.
Why?
This is seriously taking like a hard psychological toll on me. I don't even know how to like deal with the way that you address me personally as like a person right now.
As distinct from addressing you, how?
I mean,
No, you've got a position that's very important, Tyler, to insert into the discussion. I think it's extremely helpful.
I'm cool. I think I can abstain.
What?
I think I can abstain here from conversation.
But are you going to come to the section?
I really don't.
You don't want to what?
I don't know. I probably won't. I mean, yeah, I don't know how to explain myself here. I don't know exactly what you expect from me.
All I'm expecting is I want you to participate in the discussion because I think you've got a very important point of
The
view.
entire lecture is revolving around painting me as an anarchist.
No. I don't think you're an anarchist. No, that's Sam. Sam's the, isn't that right, Sam? You're not. I don't believe you're an anarchist. I don't believe you're an anarchist at all. I want your point of view because it's important, so people can think. Okay, I just want you to consider that. Okay, because nobody's beating up on you at all. I'm just trying to solicit your participation. Yes.
I was just wondering if we're allowed to have section headers in our paper, and if we can use this 12 steps to like.
Sure you can. Sure you can. Yeah. Okay. So look, we're at this spot now where we have to go across the street and go into the other building because they're going to come and invade our little our place here. Okay.
If anybody wants to go to a graduate dropout party on the 13th after graduations, 9:30 at the Max House. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. 1314 Ocean Street. It's gonna be cracking.